Okay, good evening, members, and welcome to this meeting of the Corporate Services, Climate Change and Scrutiny Management Committee. I'll begin with some housekeeping for members of the public who are joining us for the meeting. No fire alarm is planned. In the event of a fire alarm, please follow us out of the room and out of the building. And the toilets are just through this door on the left-hand side. Councillor Taylor.
Thanks, Chair. In terms of housekeeping, can I just ask, are any of the windows open? Because this is proper snug in here. And I've just got over something pretty nasty, do you know what I mean? And I'm guessing like it's good to make it slightly more breathable, because there's going to be a lot of hot air for the next 2 or 3 hours, isn't there?
What you mean?
Oh God, I can't think that which. We're going to do this whole. I'm going to sit here then.
Thanks. I mean, if other people see it differently, that's cool.
We'll see how we go. Okay, so we now have fresh air. Apologies for absence. I've received apologies from Councillor Rowley, and Councillor Stewart is substituting, and apologies from Councillor Kelly and Councillor Myers. I haven't heard from Councillor Healy, so he may join us at some point. So next item is declarations of interest. Do any members have any interest they wish to declare that not already on their published register of interests? Councillor Merritt.
Although they're on my declaration of interest, I think I ought to make a note of them for today. I am Council's representative on Yorkshire Purchasing Organisation, which is obviously a supplier who will be covered by the purchasing papers, and also to a degree by the carbon accounting in terms of purchases, scope 3. So I think I ought to record that specifically.
Yep, that's great, thank you. Any of the members have any interest they would wish to declare? No? Thank you very much. Next agenda item, the minutes of the meeting held on the 18th of March. Do any members have any matters of accuracy they wish to raise with the minutes? If not, are we happy to agree them as an accurate record? Yeah, thank you. In terms of matters arising, we can pick up under work plan the timing of the workforce development report coming back to the committee, because I think things have moved on since the last meeting, and there was an action to circulate to members a template form to be used for members who wish to put forward topics for scrutiny, task and finish reviews, and Democratic Services have done that. Okay, thank you. The next agenda item is public participation. We have one registered participant at today's meeting, and that person is Jeff Beacon, who is joining us here in person. So Jeff, if I can invite you to come and join us at the end of the table, please. Yep, that's absolutely fine. So if you move the microphone unit close to you, as close to you as possible.
Yeah.
Just so we can all hear you, and press the button so that
I pressed the button.
Mic,
Can you,
so this
is it working now?
It is. So you've got
Good.
3 minutes, Jeff. So in your own time.
Thank you. First of all, can I congratulate the council on the state of the new electric buses? They cause less pollution, and York smells better for it, have better performance, but the ones I've been on have been far too crowded and held up in traffic. York really does need a congestion charge to cut traffic levels. Now for the nasty bit. The slogan, York aims to be carbon neutral by 2030, hardly seems credible. It's still on the refuse lorries. I doubt if this was ever the aim, since it's such a big task that I can't see how anyone could have really believed it. And soon after the motion was passed, its meanings seemed to change from working for York being carbon neutral to York Council being carbon neutral, which is a much smaller task. If York is to become carbon neutral, the council ought to actually be telling the big polluters what the problem is. And if you look at the website carbon.place, you'll see that many residents in Cottonthorpe, Bishopthorpe, Strenshaw and Woodthorpe have enormous carbon emissions, 4 or 5 times as big as the lowest in York, and seem to fly a lot, drive a lot. And I'm guessing, without looking into the family expenditures, early stuff, that they eat quite a lot of beef and lamb and dairy. All these are trashing the climate, and we know how bad the situation is now. Even the BBC, which has been reluctant to accept climate change, it is saying quite a lot of things about it now. And I'm sad to say the local plan will compound some of this by allowing settlements of a similar nature. Now, I'd like to know if anybody here really believes that the aim is realistic to get York to be carbon neutral by 2030. Would it be rude to ask for a show of hands? Does anyone really believe that? Can I say that no hands were shown? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Beacon. Obviously, you're welcome to stay for the rest of the meeting if you wish, but if you need to leave, that's absolutely fine.
Oh, I won't rush them.
Okay. Thank you very much. Okay, so we now move on to the first substantive item, which is on greenhouse gas accounting and scope 3 emissions. If I can ask Sean Gibbons to join us at the table. I think Claire Foley, you coming up as well. Thank you. So as members will be aware, climate change is within the remit of this committee and has been for the last year or so. So this is another item that we're looking at under that area of our remit. Sean and Claire will introduce the report. We're joined by Councillor Kate Revilius, who's the executive member for Environment and Climate Change. You're welcome to listen to the discussion, make any comments you wish to make, respond to any comments that colleagues raise. So in terms of what we're asked to do today, so we're asked to review the content of the report and provide any recommendations to the executive member, and obviously to ask any questions of officers on any of the content of, I think, what's a very interesting report, and one that will hopefully be the start of a long-term discussion around the council's climate change ambitions. So if I hand over to Sean and Claire, obviously you can take the report as read, but please do make any introductory remarks that you wish. Thank you.
Thank you. So I'll just provide a short introduction and then I'll hand over to Sean for all the technical information. We've brought to you today, as you know, the Greenhouse Gas Accounting Scope 3 Emissions Report. It follows in March 2019 the full council declaring a climate emergency and setting a target for us to be carbon neutral by 2030. It takes into account, at the time, we took into account Scope 1, 2 and 3 emissions as set out by the Greenhouse Gas Protocol. In December 2022, the climate change strategy 2022 to 2032 was approved by full council. And it set us the priority to focus on scope 1 and 2, recognising the significant challenge of scope 3 emissions. And that by influencing supply chains or travel arrangements of private citizens, we were less likely to have an impact that we wanted on scope 3 emissions. However, we, the council, are now beginning to monitor and mitigate our own scope 3 emissions, such as home to work travel or procurement sustainability questions. It still remains challenging though. We are monitoring greenhouse gases as it's essential to monitor progress against our ambition to be carbon neutral and report annually on our own and citywide emissions every year around about November. Many frameworks exist to monitor greenhouse gas emissions. All are relatively similar. The most widely used is Greenhouse Gas Protocol. And then since 2020, the Local Government Association have helpfully provided a free greenhouse gas accounting tool. And in 2023, CDP reviewed this and aligned it with their own greenhouse gas protocol standards, which means we have now adopted it, which is evident from our emissions reporting in 2022 and 2023. I'll hand over to Sean for the detail, but I just want to stress the challenge of scope 3 emissions. So over to Sean for the detail. Thank you.
Thank you. Evening, everyone. I'm going to run through the detail of the paper. I'm happy to take questions as I go through, or at the end. I'll let you decide what's best. No problem. So the council's been reporting on carbon emissions for some time now. I think the first time we calculated our corporate emissions was in 2015, before my time, as part of our first sustainability strategy. It's in the last 3 years that we've really stepped up our reporting, and we now report carbon emissions annually as a way of monitoring progress against the council's ambition of being net zero by 2030. That annual report is published through decision session of the executive member, and this report sets out our approach and the methodology for compiling this annual report, with an opportunity for scrutiny to feed into the development of the next report, which will cover financial year 2023-24. Just so everyone's at the same level of understanding, greenhouse gas accounting is the quantification of emissions associated with an organisation's activity. It's not a legal requirement for local authorities yet, but it is seen as good practice for monitoring and managing progress towards net zero. As Claire said, prior to 2022, the council had its own methodology for greenhouse gas reporting based on good practice guidance and existing frameworks that were out there. Last year, in 2023, we adopted the Local Government Association's GHG tool, which was aligned with the greenhouse gas protocols and approved by CDP. The tool has comprehensive coverage of a local authority's scope 1 and 2 emissions, and it covers some scope 3 emissions. As Claire said, these are really challenging, and I'll cover that in a bit more detail later on. The benefits of using the LGA tool are there in the report on paragraph 10. It is a free tool, which is extremely useful. It does allow for benchmarking and comparison with other local authorities. When we submitted our report at the back end of last year, one of the first things we did was go and see how we compared with other local authorities. But what we realised was that a direct comparison with other local authorities of total emissions was not that helpful, mainly because every local authority is different in its size and the scope of services that it provides. So what that has meant is that this year, we will look to provide some normalisation of our carbon emissions by providing tonnes of carbon per pound spent based on our overall organisational budget, tonnes of carbon by head count, and tonnes of carbon by our local authority geography. And we'll also be making a recommendation to the LGA that they include those normalisation units as part of their framework as well. Local authorities set their own boundary for which emissions are reported against. This can cover either operational or financial boundaries. This is paragraph 11 of the report. There is no right or wrong answer to which boundary a local authority chooses. It can just simply be based on what information, what data is available, and what best represents how an organisation operates. We've made the decision to adopt an operational boundary. This makes sure that we cover all of the sites that we own or maintain, but excludes examples where I was struggling to think of a specific example, but examples where we might pay for an external organisation to provide a service on our behalf, but we don't have control over the building that they might be in, how that building operates, and how they might travel to and from services. Table 1 of the report shows the categories that contribute to the council's emissions, and I'll go into a little bit of detail on the calculation of emissions across each of those. So Scope 1 emissions are released as a direct result of a council activity. For us, that's the burning of fossil fuels, and it covers combustible fuel for heating and fleet operations. We compile heating data from 74 council sites, including our corporate buildings, maintained schools, museum buildings and libraries. The council fleet currently covers 267 vehicles, with Scope 1 emissions comprising data from those vehicles that use diesel and petrol as a fuel source. Scope 2 emissions relate to the indirect emissions of our energy consumption, typically grid supplied electricity. All of the electricity that we buy comes from renewable sources, and our energy provider provides a renewable energy guarantee of origin to confirm that they come from renewable sources. There is a cost, additional cost to this renewable element of the contract, which increases the overall cost of energy to the council by just over 4%. We do calculate what the emissions would be from our electricity consumption if they weren't coming from renewable sources, but this isn't reported against our total annual figure in accordance with best practice and the LGA guidance. Just under 2/3 of our electricity usage is attributed to our buildings, with the majority of what's left coming from street lighting. So Claire mentioned Scope 3 emissions are notoriously difficult to calculate and report on. You're often relying on data available from other organisations. A lot of it's out of our control as to whether that data is available to us or not. The categories that local authorities typically report against has been fairly limited in the past, but we're increasing our coverage every year. Some of the categories that we're reporting against include staff business travel, staff commuting, home working, water usage, material usage from our building services, and corporate waste contracts. We're adding new sources of data all of the time. For example, we're right now looking into the emissions associated with our IT equipment that we use in our buildings. Staff travel is recorded through our travel and booking portal, and it covers vehicle miles and hotel usage. We've struggled to get hold of water data in previous years. When we do get it, it's provided by Yorkshire Water, but they haven't always been able to provide that for us. Building services, as I've mentioned, have been working with our material suppliers to undertake a really detailed piece of work into the embodied carbon associated with these materials. Emissions associated with our corporate waste and recycling are supplied by our waste contract provider. At the moment, we're looking to include other waste streams, such as the waste electrical and electronic equipment. And for the first time last year, we provided a survey for staff to understand the emissions associated with commuting and home working. The questionnaires provided in an annex of this report, and off the back of that we were contacted by several local authorities who are interested in replicating our approach within their own area. The next section provides information on some of the interventions that are already underway and future plans to reduce our emissions, to reduce the emissions associated with heating our buildings. We've so far completed 34 heat decarbonisation plans. If implemented in full, the measures in these plans could reduce annual emissions by over 1,500 tonnes, with a cost saving of over £600,000 a year. The challenge is how we finance this work. There's a capital requirement in excess of £21 million. And so we're currently looking at external funding sources to undertake that activity. Our fleet electrification programme is well underway. All of our vehicles under 3.5 tonnes will eventually be electric. At the moment, over half our fleet now meets the low emissions definition, and that's up from a quarter of our fleet in 21-22. We've got energy efficiency schemes underway, which are addressing our Scope 2 emissions. LED lighting conversions are being undertaken on our street lighting and corporate sites, funded by the Combined Authorities Net Zero Fund. Solar panels are currently on 7 council-owned sites, and our Solar for Schools programme continues to expand, with another 3 schools expected to receive solar installations this year. Scope 3 will continue to be challenging, but we are making progress. We're working with procurement colleagues to ensure that all new contracts consider the environmental impact of the work that they're taking. And off the back of the home working survey, we're also working with iTravel to refresh the council travel plan. Final word on carbon offsetting and insetting. So net zero is about balancing the emissions in the atmosphere with those that are being absorbed. So it's not the same as absolute zero, which would be no emissions going into the atmosphere. So we are committed to reducing emissions as much as possible, but we do need to accept that some residual emissions will remain, and therefore an element of removal will be required to meet our net zero ambition. We're already delivering local schemes that will offset some of the council's ongoing emissions. The trees planted as part of the York Community Woodland will absorb over 18,000 tonnes of carbon over the next 50 years, and this will contribute to the council's net zero ambition.
Thank you, Sean. Thank you, Claire, for a very interesting and thorough report. And yeah, I think it's been really helpful to clarify the difference between the various scopes of emissions, which I know are bandied around, but it's really helpful to see it in easily understandable language. Thank you for producing that. So members, there's an opportunity to ask any questions, make any comments. Councillor Taylor.
Thank you, Chair. I have a few questions, but I'll just ask one for now. It's about the sort of graph shown on section 38 of the report, the impact of implementing our heat decarbonisation strategy. I'm just wondering, so the cost of implementing all the measures involved in that ought to be in excess of 21 million. In terms of money that we know that we can spend, how far off that figure are we currently? Are we in excess of 21 million away from it?
I would think we're still a long way from it. I have to check with finance about what the planned maintenance budget is for our assets, but I would think we are still some way off 21 million.
I mean, could you give a rough, are we 75%, far away from it, or are we?
I don't think I could give you even a rough estimate now, Councillor, but I can check with finance what the budget is for the planned maintenance works and come back to you with a written response to that one.
I mean, yeah, thank you. I mean, I think it raises a point which, we might want to consider with any recommendations, which sort of touches on the comms element around this in terms of communicating the scale of the challenge to the public. In a way, I mean, as important as this issue is, it's quite similar to a lot of other challenges the council faces, in that there's an aspiration, but the gap between the aspiration and the reality is quite eye-watering. It could be road repairs as an example, and I think we need to get better at sort of saying this is what we want to do, but we're actually here. Because Because if you just looked at that graph, you'd think, okay, well, that looks like a fairly comfortable slide down, but the reality is a lot more difficult than that, isn't it? Anyway, I won't get into speech
Yeah.
territory, sorry.
No, that's helpful, thank you. Councillor Merritt.
Yes, just some factual questions, if that's all right to start with. Para 16 refers to the council's buildings. How do we deal with the council's housing stock, which is obviously an enormous number of buildings compared with the ones that are listed here, and how comprehensive is that list in terms of the council's non-housing stock? I mean, we obviously have a lot more libraries than two. Are there other sort of categories that so far aren't appearing?
Thank you.
Yeah, in terms of our non-housing stock, yes, there are other buildings that we own that we haven't got the data for. But amongst those that we do have and we have calculated the data for, it makes up well over 90% of the overall energy consumption across our portfolio. In terms of the residential side of things, yes, we have a huge housing stock as a council, but we don't have access to the information of energy used within those homes. So our residents are responsible for selecting their own energy provider and paying their own energy bills. We have no control over that and no access to that information either.
Is that actually correct? Do we not provide the heating systems even if the bills are paid by the occupant?
We would be responsible for maintaining the heating system, but we don't pay the bills on it.
No, I know we don't pay the bills, but if we determine the heating systems, we go a long way towards determining the carbon emissions.
We can through that, but we don't have access to the data. We don't know the energy consumption within that property. We can't present it here.
Just as a quick follow-up to the, I know the reference made to the Combined Authority Net Zero fund of the two independent living complexes that is planned, they're planned to benefit from sort of an upgrade to the kind of heating infrastructure. So are you seeing that as a kind of a test case in terms of securing investment, making an intervention with a view to an output being, you know, more energy efficient, more carbon saved and cheaper bills, presumably?
Yeah, absolutely. So the
Microphone.
21 million pounds, as noted, is obviously a huge amount of funding that we need. However, there are different government grants available, and that one particularly is from the Mayoral Combined Authority. And we would hope to find other, or to hopefully successfully achieve other funding from the Mayoral Combined Authority to meet the regional ambition to be carbon negative. So going one step further than carbon neutral. Just to come back to Councillor Merritt as well, of course, there's the the social housing retrofit programme. So although we don't have the data, there is a programme to retrofit the social housing, which is underway.
Okay. I'll come back to you, Councillor Merritt. I'm sure you'll have some other questions. Councillor Widdowson.
Just a couple of points that may be helpful. When you're looking at the measurements, we do go back as a council every year and look at the whole data set. I know it's always a couple of years behind, but that gives us an idea where we're getting to on that easy slide down, Callum. So I just thought that's worth remembering, that you've got the global data so that we can see where the whole of the city's going. I'm just picking up on the point for how much it may or may not cost. If I remember rightly, Councillor Pavlovic's paper on the retrofit was coming in at about £39,000 a home, which was for a council home. So that's 39 million for every 1,000 council homes. And we've got 7,500 of them, just to give a ballpark figure. That's what's in my head. If I'm wrong, tell me. Yeah.
Well, that sounds about right. Yeah.
Right, okay.
Okay. Yeah. Councillor Taylor, you think you said when you asked your first question you had some others, so please do go ahead.
Thanks, Chair. You've thrown me there. I guess one question I've got, and I don't mean this to come across as cheeky or crude in any way, but I'm curious in about the sort of all the council officers' work looking at carbon reduction. How much of that is basically reporting focused, gathering data focused versus bid writing or evaluating things or coming up with new ideas? Because the information gathering aspect of this in itself seems gargantuan. And I read this thinking, I wonder if, and it's a ridiculous question to just throw it out there, but I sort of sit here and think, well, if we stopped worrying about the information gathering so much and just focused on individual things and blitzed them to make them as low carbon as possible, would that see us in a better off position? If you see what I'm getting at, I'm not at all dismissing the value of the information we've got, but that amount of work and that type of work on its own is huge, and that's before you've even made those inroads. Can you talk about that at all?
Yeah, I can. Yeah, thank you for the question. It's an interesting one. I mean, the data that comes in is not all compiled by the carbon reduction team. It's compiled across the council, and of course, we're already recording information on energy usage and energy costs as part of bill paying and paying invoices. So that information is recorded as part of our day-to-day activity of paying those bills. And the information that comes on from fleets will come from our fleet services team that are going through a process of procuring new vehicles and keeping a record of old and new vehicles. So our team, we're not, I don't think we're recording any or having to capture any new information. It's just compiling information that already sits across different departments of the council. And the process of putting these reports together is not a huge percentage of the work that we do as a team. Most of our focus is on supporting other council departments to decarbonise their activities, looking outwards, supporting businesses and residents to transition to net zero, and looking for external funding and delivering projects. That's the vast majority of what we do. I do think these reports are important for providing clarity on where we're at right now and where we need to be, and are really valuable for that managing and monitoring progress against the ambition that we've set, and helping us identify areas where we could do better.
Just to add to that as well, thanks, Sean. So we share the methodology that we use to collate the information, and we share the actual information itself, the output, if you like, with the city. So we've got a group called the Sustainable City Leaders Group, which are all of the equivalents of Sean, if you like, the heads of carbon reduction or the heads of sustainability or that equivalent in different anchor institutions across the council. And we share that information as a way really of showing that kind of civic leadership, because it gives them that opportunity to take some of the way we've learned to pull things together as effectively as possible into their own organisations. So we had a meeting only last week, was it? I think, yeah, last week, and a great number of them are taking the home to work survey, so that we can see how we compare with other anchor institutions across the city, but then they can see how they compare with us. And it's really helpful when you're thinking about that citywide response. Thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Stewart.
Thank you, Chair. It's on sort of broad about how we influence resident behaviour. And you know, as has been said, the council's a small dot in York. Do you think that we're doing everything we can as a council and as a sort of society and as a world to tell people what carbon emissions equate to what, so they can make choices? You know, so for example, calorie content of food. So we know calorie content of food, and therefore people can make choices that they really like chocolate, therefore they'll eat calories there, you know, but they'll sacrifice elsewhere. Because it strikes me that obviously, you know, when Sean, you said about the woodland and, you know, the 18,000 tonnes over sort of 50 years, and I was thinking, how much is that, you know, per year, per tree and everything like that. But for me, we know what sort of the better thing to do. The better thing to do is to walk rather than get a big Range Rover. It's to cycle rather than get a plane journey and everything like that. But you know, beyond that, for me, I don't think that people know the sort of lower level choices they're making. So in other words, they go out and buy an SUV versus a small electric car. I don't think they know that. I mean, what are they saving? You know, a kilogram of carbon or a ton of carbon a year. And if they do all their recycling versus don't do any recycling, again, is that saving, you know, a ton of carbon? Or, you know, and I think if we got that knowledge out to people, then they could make far better decisions on, you know, and feel more inspired on what they're doing. So, you know, is that fair? Because I say it's my view that I know what will be the better thing carbon wise, but in terms of where the savings should be made, and I'm just conscious that people aren't going to do everything. You know, that's the reality of stuff. So is that a fair sort of thought?
Yeah, I don't know. I suppose it's picking up slightly around Councillor Taylor's point around publicising the scale of the challenge, but also the difference that residents can make alongside setting out the measures that the council is making. Is that something that you've kind of considered, how to make it more of a citywide endeavour rather than the council doing something and everyone else is?
Yeah, so if I come in first, and yeah, so I'll start. So thank you, councillor. So some of that information is already available nationally. If you think about, if you're buying a new washing machine, for example, you'll get an AA rating, or you can choose an E rating, and one rating is more eco-friendly, if you like, than another. And when you come to sell your house, you need to have a home energy rating. But you're absolutely right in terms of why an LED light instead of another light bulb. It's not so regularly known. At the moment, our focus is on really picking up on Councillor Taylor's point, bringing in the big grants, bringing in the big bids that give us the opportunity to do some sort of large scale projects. You know, changing council LED street lights to LED lights, that sort of thing. We're just starting a one-stop shop retrofit program, which will better help household owners know how to make their own properties more energy efficient, but also reduce carbon. But you're right, there is still a huge range of, like buying a jumper. Is a jumper more, if you buy it sustainably, where would you get it from, etc.? What's the price differential? All those sorts of things are still not widely known. And I guess there's a role for us in a local authority, but then there's also a role to think about for national government and how they set those standards, if you like, around consumer goods. So thank you.
Okay, thank you. Sean?
Yeah, a couple of things for me. I suppose the first one is just to acknowledge that the scope of this paper, as agreed with the chair, was around the council's emissions. As Councillor Widdowson says, there's a separate report that we do that covers the city, which might be suitable to bring to a future meeting. But just I will answer the question as well. Lots of studies have been done around what it would take to shift behaviours to a more sustainable, more low carbon lifestyles, and what they all tend to indicate is that information provision or giving people knowledge is not sufficient in itself to drive behaviour change. People need to feel motivated and have a reason to change their behaviour, whether it's financial or for their individual health or whatever that reason might be. Just giving them that knowledge, and there's examples of that throughout society. You know, people still smoke when they know that they shouldn't. People still drink alcohol when they know that they shouldn't. But if we can provide that incentive and we can design that into the system, then that's far more likely to influence people's behaviour. Knowledge and information is important, but it's not sufficient in itself. We need other things in place as well.
Thank you. Councillor Waller.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you to Sean for the summary. It's 30 years since the first motion on reducing carbon emissions by this authority, or its predecessor. And so that there have been steps done since. So what I wanted to see in this paper is how this iteration is achieving that critical mass of, yes, the council is a slither of the carbon footprint within the area, but it has the ability to influence wider. And you'd mentioned, Claire, the sharing of best practice, which was previously done through Agenda 21, but that drifted away as key decision makers were not attending those meetings. So it's about demonstrating through this work that the objectives of getting companies and organisations within the city to use their buying power, similar to the councils, to influence the supply chain, to make those changes that, yes, it is worth suppliers thinking about, well, I'll be asked about this equipment must be A-rated because everybody's asking for it. It's not just CYC, it's all of the other organisations. So it's understanding from this how that mindset change, which then gets people using the best equipment, which helps everybody to reduce their carbon footprint and therefore achieves a much greater impact than just the council on its own.
Who'd like to have a go at that?
Gosh, yeah, point well made and taken. I think we are having an influence through other businesses, through some of the networks that we've established. The Green Business Forum is one where we regularly have 30 businesses from across the city attend and discuss sustainability and climate change topics. We're providing best practice, we're sharing local case studies, and we're influencing how organisations can transition to net zero. The York Climate Commission is another organisation that brings together lots of different groups from across the city, right through from grassroots organisations to the largest single source emitters across the city, and we're trying to exert influence through that group to support the decarbonisation efforts of the city. And then there are projects and programmes that we deliver as well. One of the UK Share Prosperity funded projects is providing support and advice to 100 businesses across the city on how they can decarbonise and producing decarbonisation plans for 75 of those businesses. So we do exert influence through the networks and through the projects that we deliver. Of course, we have a role as well as kind of the chief placemaker through our role as the planning authority and how we exert influence on new developments across the city and through our own procurement processes as well, which I'm sure you'll cover later.
Thank you, Sean. Councillor Merritt, come back to you.
Obviously very pleasing to see the additional information that we've got on Scope 3 emissions. And I assume the work's continuing. You've got the section para 29 on the building services. There's obviously also the highways side. Assuming all the asphalts and stuff that we use there are pretty carbon intensive too. Is work underway on trying to get a handle on that?
Yes, it is. We're trying, and the way that we're approaching that is to try and exert influence or exert pressure, I should say, on those companies that are providing those materials. We're demanding that information from them now, as lots of different organisations are, and it's very much consumer-driven requirement on organisations to undertake those embodied carbon assessments and provide that information when they enter into contracts with the council. I think I mentioned at the start that we're doing a piece of work at the moment looking at the embodied carbon of the IT equipment that we use as a council. So we are looking to expand that, but it's a long process, but we will get there.
Yeah. Just again, procurement, obviously materials are one side. Other services, there are some of them presumably also have sort of fairly high carbon footprints. What's the situation in terms of our waste disposal services and the incinerator and all the other plants and equipment that's over at Allerton?
Yeah, so again, just to say the scope of this report just covers the corporate waste contract. So that's the waste that we generate through our council operations. So it's the bins here at council offices and our other sites as well. It's not covering all household and commercial waste for the city. So we record, or sorry, our waste contractor for the council records wastage data based on in terms of tonnage and also the amount of waste that we produce that then goes to recycling, and we can calculate the carbon emissions that are associated with that. Again, I think I said up front that we're looking to identify and isolate other waste streams. So waste electronic equipment would have a different carbon factor than general waste. We're looking to identify and separate that waste stream and calculate the emissions that are associated with that. But again, we're reliant on data from our waste contractors. So we're starting to exert pressure on them to record more data, more accurate information, and provide us with that so that we can put that into future reports.
Thank you. Councillor Healy.
Thank you, Chair. Just a point to note, it would be very useful in here if for at least scope 1 and 2, you actually just gave a total. So then you got something to measure your actions against your total. Second point is it would be, again, very useful if you had a consistent way of saying your savings plus a negative. So you've used something about trees that was over 50 years. You've used the inefficient heating system, that's over 15 years, and the others are per year. And some of the other ones in here are, again, it's very difficult. You've got to divide it and then subtract it. So it's very hard to actually follow the numbers. And this is essentially a number form. So picking up on what the public speaker said, and what I think yourself said, Councillor Taylor at the beginning, the motion that was passed in 2019 is carbon neutral by 2030, and the executive member might want to come in on that. As we've heard, this has been going back 30 years. We're now a year into this first term, which, given the fact there's 7 years left to 2030, that's 1/7 of the time. Do you have any confidence at all that this is in any way realistic? No, 2023. I know, but we've had a year.
So
Yeah.
I think officers have alluded to the scale of the challenge, particularly in relation to scope 3, but I don't know if there's anything you want to.
Yeah, happy to
stage.
answer. Yeah, just on the first point, we didn't include the total. Maybe we should have, but the focus of this report was more about the methodology that's used in putting the report together than the emissions report itself. That the annual corporate emissions report was published as part of executive member decision session in November, and the totals and the figures are all in that report. I didn't want to duplicate or go over old ground, but it is about 5,500 tonnes of CO2 is the total emissions for council activity. On the point that you made around the public speaker's comments, again, the scope of this report is corporate emissions. We've not changed, the council hasn't changed the ambition for the city to be carbon neutral or net zero carbon by 2030. Doing so would be subject to members' decision. It wouldn't be officers that would change that. In terms of progress and how likely that is, the last time we reported corporate emissions, that's emissions associated with the council activity, we saw a 10% reduction from the previous year. That's in line with what we would need to do every year to meet our net zero ambition. And similarly, when we last reported against citywide carbon emissions, that was an 11% reduction on the previous year. We need to acknowledge that reporting year was during COVID lockdown, so that might skew the data somewhat. But again, that is on track with what we need to do every year to achieve our net zero ambition. So this year, or previous year's reporting, we are on track. Whether we can do that every year from now until 2030, we'll do our best, but don't know is the answer.
Okay, that's fine. Thank you.
Thank you. As we've heard, our ambition is to some extent constrained in part by available resources, in terms of we know what we could do with the money if we had it, but it's, as you say, putting in bids and trying to find the the money to enable us to go further and faster.
Just
Claire?
to add it, in 2019, a climate emergency was called as well, recognising how the planet is changing in terms of heating up globally, and that's gathering pace. So last year was the hottest year on record. It's looking like this year might be setting that bar, raising that bar higher. And the climate change strategy itself recognises that changes in national policy as well as technological advancements can change everything for us. So where we're sitting right now, we're on track for 10% reduction every year. Anything can happen over the next 6 years, and we wouldn't like to preempt what that might be, but that could obviously help us all across the country achieve our ambitions. Thank you.
Councillor Merritt?
I was partly going to make the same point as Claire's last point. I mean, we are not an island. We are influenced by what everyone around us is doing, and the recent government changes in the government's own trajectory on when the electric cars and the rest of it are going to come in. All of those things going back are clearly not going to help. Let's hope perhaps a new government might tighten some of those up again, but we'll see. If I could turn to the procurement section, obviously very pleasing to see the appendix 3 questions on procurement sustainability. They are fairly general. I mean, we don't seem to specifically ask for, indications of what their carbon footprint are, how it compares with, industry or service best practice, which I would have thought, we could actually look to some tighter questions. The other issue is, how are these taken into account in contract awards? I know in the past for social value type stuff, there's a scoring system, so a certain part of the score of different contract tenderers is accounted for. Is that the case with these sustainability questions?
Yeah, I don't want to swerve answering it, but it might be a question better directed at the next agenda item. But yeah, I do know it's a fine balancing act between the level of detail that we can ask for within the questions and not excluding certain organisations from bidding for those contracts. If you're a small organisation, you might not have the resource and capacity to be undertaking a carbon footprint for your organisation. But what we're trying to get across with the questions is that the organisations who we do work with, we want them to have an understanding of the carbon impact of the activity that they'll be undertaking and an understanding of how they can minimise the carbon emissions associated with that activity. So that's what we try to create within the questions. The percentages of how much they're taken into account, I'll let colleagues who are better informed than I am answer that later, if that's okay.
Yeah, we can pick that up.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Just to supplement, take your point about small local businesses not necessarily having high levels of information, but are we using the same set of questions for large contracts and large contractors as well as for small? I mean, presumably we could actually operate a differential approach to, dependent on the types of contract and the size of contracts that we're awarding.
In answer, yes, we are using the same approach at the moment, regardless of the size of contract. Varying that depending on contract size, I suppose, is something that we could look into. We haven't done that yet, but perhaps it's something we could do. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Got 3 more hands. We'll take those questions and then we'll move on. Councillor Widdowson.
I think it's a good report, shows where all the different work is heading. If you were able to, building on all the different suggestions that everybody's made, if you're able to make a real difference, what would you focus on in here?
From the corporate side, I think it's undoubtedly decarbonising the heating system of our buildings. but also the fabric improvements that go along with that. It's not always appropriate to just replace a gas boiler with an electric heating source. If you're not also improving the energy efficiency of that building, you could find yourself in a position where your operational costs actually go up. So I think that's where we'd focus our attention.
So if we know that's where we're going to focus our attention, how do we get more resource and more of your team doing that? And away from some of the stuff that may be distracting from stuff that will make an actual difference, which is what round the table everybody's saying, what is going to make a real difference.
Yeah, I think it's not just the capacity across our team, it's capacity across a few different teams. Our team kind of facilitates some of that work through the development of the heat decarbonisation plans and putting in funding applications, but we don't have engineers, for example, within our team, so we do require the input of our asset management and mechanical engineering and electrical engineering team to help facilitate and deliver those heating projects. So freeing up or creating new capacity across those areas of the council, I think, is also really important to meet the ambitions.
Thank you. Councillor Stewart.
Yeah, just to sort of carry on from the table on 38, let's come back to where Councillor Taylor started about how we do this, thing, because actually I think it's a lot easier than people are thinking. We've heard the £21 million cost, and we've sort of all around the table said how difficult that is and what an eye-watering amount of money it is, but really it's not. £21 million in capital equates to about £1.8 million a year of revenue, and £1.8 million of revenue a year is just over 1% of the revenue budget of the council. And Sean has said that there will be savings on this, and given the savings figures early, it takes it to well under 1% of the council budget. And then we're talking, Claire said about the bids that we'll put in, and obviously we get an amount of money bidding for that. So if, for example, we're successful in bidding for half of the money, for sake of argument, to achieve this over 1,500 CO2 tonnes by 2030 per year, amounts to about 1/2 of the council revenue budget. Now, given the threat of climate change, and given we have declared a climate emergency, if we're saying we really can't find 0.5% in the council budget, then I think there's something quite majorly wrong. And it's about where the intents were. And I won't go political about the great ways that the Conservatives show how money could be saved, but that simply is the case. We can't say the world's about to end, and then equally we can't find 0.5% on our revenue budget. Would you agree, Sean?
Well, I think as you're aware, Councillor Wood, members.
I thought I'd get criticised if it's not a question. So
members set the budget, as you're well aware. So I think it's really fair to ask Sean or Claire to.
Would you agree, Councillor Villiers?
I think it was more of a valued contribution, Councillor Stewart, and one that I'm sure we'll all reflect on. Thank you. Councillor Waller.
Thank you. Just looking at the way in which that 21 million might be invested, is there a matrix of those things? For instance, LED lighting, that pays for itself in 2 years. Therefore, you would do it quite early on in any change that you do, whether it's in a building or on street lights. But it's understanding you don't change boilers every year. You wait for them to expire. Whereas so it's understanding the pipeline of things that are coming up, where making a decision to pay a little bit extra to get that running cost down, that's an equation which the finance team will no doubt be vastly interested in. But it's having that data available to say, well, actually, some things we'll do earlier than others because it's the way in which the age of our boilers or whatever are coming forward. And therefore, you're able to plan to show that, yes, this is following the strategy. There'll be some years where you do your 11%, some years you do less, but then ultimately you will achieve the final outcome. But it's done in a way that you are spending strategically to achieve that goal. So it's understanding how you break that down into this is the most consistent way of doing it. And, you know, consistency hasn't always been a theme on these things when government grants. Some things are in favour for a few years and then they drop off, and then you think, well, we were just getting into that and there were real changes in the way in which the mindsets of installers and suppliers were thinking, and then, oh, the attention's gone somewhere else. So it's actually trying to use this spending power to keep that consistency when governments flip-flop.
So if you want to say anything in response, Sean, or
Tease out a question.
Yeah, again, not sure I answer to the question, but yes, I think that is the approach that's the position that we'd like to get to, and we've made the information from those heat decarbonisation plans available for inclusion within the asset management strategy and how we plan ongoing maintenance and upgrades of the assets that we've got. We have done some of that prioritisation by building. So for each building, we've identified what the low-hanging fruit is, and getting close to the limit of the low-hanging fruit work, and rapidly approaching the more expensive, more challenging measures. And then, yeah, the last point again is absolutely right, that in some way the grant funding that is available dictates which measures you end up prioritising, because that's what money is out there, and that's what we try and get hold of.
thank you, Sean. Claire?
Yeah, just to add to that, so just to give you an example of where the funders are prioritising, we've been successful, GLL have been successful in decarbonising one of the swimming pools, and they're looking at building a case for others. So it's not that we have a pipeline as such, it's more that we have a shelf of investable schemes that we can pull off when the most appropriate grant becomes available. Similar to the street lighting and the LED lighting, we could immediately say, yes, we'll do that. And we're looking at match funding, some EV transport funding through the mayoral capacity funding as well. Not because it's in a pipeline, as that's the most strategic thing to do at that time, but because we know it's attractive to the mayor.
Thank you. Thank you, officers. Thank you. Councillor Burton?
Quick question.
Yeah.
Is there money available from the combined mayoral authority to help along with this?
Yeah. So I think last year, I'm going to get I have no concept of time anymore. Last year, the combined authority announced net zero funding of about £15 million, of which we were successful in getting £3 or £4 million for different schemes. North Yorkshire got £3 or £4 million of schemes, and then different local authority and businesses shared the rest amongst them. And we understand that net zero funding will become a bit of a common occurrence, if you like. So there'll be another shout out for more net zero schemes at some point in the near future, based on whichever mayor gets elected. So it is of course dependent on the mayor now. So the mayor will get elected in May, and we'll find out what's important to them.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, members. Thank you, officers. In terms of any recommendations arising out of our discussion, I think there's been some valid points made around how communication can be used to explain what the council is doing, and how that fits into the broader picture of sort of behaviour change and the context, as Claire pointed out, which is, you know, record global temperatures every year, and that's, you know, one would hope would act as a spur to all of us to think about what we do. So I suppose a recommendation would be around thinking how you can sort of frame the work that is being done, to, you know, showcase good work that's happening, and also to show how the council can act as a leader whilst where others follow. One thing we haven't touched on was the offsetting, insetting, and there's reference in the report to a strategy that's being developed to be shared with partners. It'd be helpful if that could be brought here, in terms of to improve our understanding of what is meant by those terms, and also to feed in any comments that members may have as part of the agreement of that strategy, if that's something that you think would be doable.
Yeah, would welcome that. That'd be great. Thank you.
Okay. Super. Councillor Merritt.
Can we also record our thanks to the officers for obviously the tremendous work that is going on and the continued mapping of our emissions, which will obviously help to prioritise, what work is done.
Yeah, thank you. I'm sure we can all agree with that.
Thank you.
So thank you for your time, and thank you, Councillor Rebellious, as well. Not really.
I was just going to quickly say thanks everyone for that discussion. I've been making notes and that's been really helpful. I was just going to say around the sort of scale of the challenge that came out of this and what we need to do, and whether we should still be living with this target of 2030 net zero or making a difference to that. I think it was raised that we need to be aware that new technologies could come. We don't know what's going to happen in the coming years, so there is plenty of optimism as well. And there's economy of scale. Once we get going on things, sometimes it can be cheaper to do than our estimate at the moment, which might be with the existing technology and doing it at a sort of smaller scale. The other thing is that even if we were to alter our ambition, the climate emergency doesn't change. So we need to stick with what actually needs to be done in order to try and maintain our reach those safe levels and maintain within 2 degrees, 1.5 degrees. And obviously York can't do that on its own, and we have to look globally, but we should be doing what we can within those science-based objectives. The other thing is that it's more important to reduce as fast as we can early on than to plan to do more later, because those emissions reductions right now will have a greater impact than if you leave it till later. So it's really good to keep that ambition. And even though, yes, it's 6 years away and we've said 2030 net zero, I would prefer that as a council, we try as hard as we can and overshoot than we sort of say, okay, we'll change our target to something further out. Because everything we can do now will count for more than if we leave it till later. And just about the comments that came up about our wider influence, I completely agree that we want to influence the rest of the city and work with partners. And I think there is more work to be done on that. But we have widened out the Climate Commission. We're working with a greater number of partners across the city, and we're looking at how we can exert that wider influence. So that's something we're really working on, and it's important. It's difficult to record how much influence we're having. And I wouldn't want to, as Councillor Taylor said, use all of our carbon team's time on doing recording data rather than getting on with making a difference. But nonetheless, it's useful to have some data coming in. And the other thing on our wider influence is our transport strategy is going to be really important in terms of that behaviour change thing that Councillor Stewart brought up. How do we actually nudge people in the right direction? So I think we've looked at where we as a council can perhaps have biggest influence on emissions that aren't directly our own, and transport is one of those things. So we're really working hard on the transport strategy. Councillor Waller raised again about our wider influence. I think one of the things we perhaps need to look at a bit harder is how we can use our influence via planning, and that's something I will be looking at. To come back to Councillor Stewart's question of our 21 million in capital and couldn't we just put aside 0.5% of the council budget? I'd like to look at those calculations. I think it's a really good point. Certainly in our forthcoming budget, I will be making the case that we should be putting aside a percentage to be serious about climate. And yeah, I think it's a really good point to look at it in that way. So thank you for raising that. Just looking at what else was raised. I think that about covers it. I've made lots of notes and I really appreciate everyone's time and thought in the debate you've had. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So if we move on to agenda item 5, changes in procurement legislation. So if I can invite officers to join us at the table, and a change of executive member, welcome Councillor Lomas. So we've got all our nameplates correct. Welcome. So this report sets out an overview of changes in procurement legislation that are due to come into effect from the 1st of October, I believe, of this year, and what that will mean for the procurement function at the council. So if officers can take the report as read, if there's any brief introductory remarks you'd like to make, then please introduce yourself. Please go ahead.
Thank you. So my name's Debbie Mitchell. I'm the council's Chief Finance Officer. And as you said, we've just brought you an update report on procurement because the legislation is due to change later this year. And it's a significant piece of work really that Chloe's been leading on as our head of procurement. There are some challenges, but there are some opportunities as well arising from this change. And so Chloe's just going to point out for you a few of the key points because we recognise it's quite technical in areas and it's quite a long report. So we thought it'd be helpful just to point out some of those key opportunities and challenges, and hopefully we'll pick up some of those sustainability questions you asked on the previous item as we go through as well. Chloe.
Thank you, Debbie. Thank you, Chair. So I'm Chloe Wilcox. I'm the head of procurement here for the City of York. As Debbie just said, I'm not going to propose to go through the report in detail. Instead, I'm going to pick out the key risks and the key changes that will directly impact us as a contracting authority. Now, the legislation is very much in place. We are currently in implementation period, and the government announced today that the go live date has changed, and that will now be the 28th of October. So we have a little bit more time for preparation. So within the report, it does go through the risks. It goes through what myself and my team have been undertaking for the authority. The key risks associated with the procurement legislation are transparency, compliance, contract management, and the increase of challenges through bidding and freedom of information requests. To add on to that, there is also a separate legislation called the Provider Selection Regime. That is to do with healthcare services. So that's another legislation that we have to adhere to, as well as the Procurement Act, and that came in force January of this year. Now, in terms of how we're trying to manage and mitigate those risks, we are providing additional training to COIC officers. So anybody who has any purchasing requirements or decisions, they will have this training delivered directly to them. We are tightening our strategies and our policies. So we have updated the council's contract procedure rules to make sure that that is also linking in with the new act and there's no discrepancies there. And we are continuing to review our market awareness and making sure that our markets are aware of the changes and how this is directly going to impact them, with a heavier focus on our small local contractors and our SMEs. The awareness that we've taken so far, we've had internal communication sent out internally and externally. We've had information put on the COIC website and internal website, and I am in contact with the business growth team to develop supplier engagement events or information sessions to pinpoint them to the information that they need to go to. It's a lot of work. It's not a reduction in red tape for contracting authorities. It will be brilliant for the market in terms of their approach to bidding and the level of information and the number of documents that they as a business have to submit. It significantly reduces that. But for us as a contracting authority, it does not do that at all. So we have to be aware of the pressures of capacity not only for procurement teams, but for the rest of the teams across the council. So in terms of, there's one key element that we must focus on and must continue to manage is the contract management requirement. Now, as part of the new legislation, any contract over £5 million, 3 KPIs must be published, and you publicly must monitor that contract. So you must report on poor performance, on good performance, and you must evidence that we as a contracting authority are receiving value for money and we are using taxpayers' money in a suitable way. A positive for the new Procurement Act, sustainability and social value is still very much a forefront in that. That is still a key focus, and it's still a requirement that we must push through procurements. There is an allocation of 10% in the questions that we ask, and that is a government standard which we've adopted as a local authority as well. So that's the summary of the procurement legislation. So I'm open to questions.
Excellent. Thank you very much. So I'll start, if I may, in terms of following on from the discussion I had around questions we currently ask around of suppliers around the council's climate change ambitions. Will the new legislation, will that support that approach? Will it hinder that approach? You mentioned 10% as is that a weighting to be used when sort of factoring in social value or climate change ambitions when considering bids? Is that fixed? Is the flexibility? So how, I suppose what I'm asking is, how will these new rules enable us to improve on what we currently do?
Yeah.
Or not?
No, it certainly does. So the new Act definitely encourages and drives more focus on sustainability and social value. It encourages you to kind of procure differently and creatively. So there's a new route that we can choose to do for a procurement, which allows you to drive more innovation and more sustainability and social value through that. What it doesn't mention that we as an authority have done previously and will continue to do is we need to upskill the market. We need to bring the market around to what it is that we would like delivered on behalf of the council. So it allows us to do that through the market engagement sessions that are now mandatory that we have to publish a notice on. So it absolutely supports the thought process for sustainability and social value. It encourages more procurements to include that. The 10% weighting, it's not set in stone, it's not fixed, that's just the minimum that you have to apply. So you can increase that during a procurement if you wanted to.
Thank you very much. Yeah, members, Councillor Healy.
So coming back to the 10%, what's the other 90%? Is that literally how much is it? How much it is going to cost?
No, so it depends on your procurement. So when you're procuring something, there's a quality split and a price split, and 60% quality, you might have, for ease, you might have 6 questions and 10% would apply to each of those questions to equate to your 60% total. You'll then have your 40%, which is what your pricing submission will be evaluated on. Both of that is then put into an Excel master sheet, which calculates the percentage that you've got for each question and then your overall percentage. Both are evaluated differently, so any evaluation team will not have sight of price until they finalise their quality. But you can vary that. You can have 70-30, 80-20, or 90-10 if you wanted to. It depends on what it is that you're procuring and what the priorities are in that procurement. So if it's solely for pencils, we know what pencils do. We wouldn't have a huge weighting on the quality, we'd focus it more on the price. If you have a service that you're wanting to be delivered for the authority, depending on what that service is, you would look at what priorities you want for the city and the residents, and you then have a higher marking for your quality.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Stewart.
Yeah, just on page 17, paragraph 17, we've got the criteria for various things, and it talks about businesses with less than 10 employees, fine. Businesses in Yorkshire and Humberside, fine. And then businesses with the YO postcode. Is that what we mean? So obviously YO would include Scarborough, but it wouldn't include Tadcaster. So I wouldn't, I could understand why we would say with a York postcode, but do we measure YO, and if so, why? Because it doesn't seem very relevant to me.
Yeah, it depends on what data we can get out of the system, quite honestly, Councillor Stewart. So we can do the data on a York postcode, but it's quite a time intensive process because we literally have to get the postcode, and if it's Y01, it might be York, but if it's Y017, it's not York. So it depends on how we can get the data out. It's a manual exercise. We've used YO as a bit of a shorthand, as you say. It covers Scarborough, but it's trying to get as local as we can without having somebody to sit down and map out exactly every postcode and which area it's in, because it's just not been that easy to do. It's work in progress, and something that we're trying to improve as we go.
Okay, yeah, because I mean, I think it does. I appreciate why we sort of want YO postcodes, but it is quite flawed if we look at it like that, isn't it? I mean, if, for example, we gave a contract to someone in Scarborough rather than Tadcaster, you know, our system would have, as it were, improved, even though clearly that Scarborough business would likely employ far fewer York people than Tadcaster ones. So I think it would probably make more sense if we were to look at York postcodes or not York postcodes. And given, you know, the YO component, there's not hundreds of YOs, there's YO1, YO, you know, up to, I think that'd be quite straightforward. I don't think it'd be difficult in the context of the money we're talking about to break it down for York and not York.
We've used it as a bit of a shorthand. It's designed really just to give you an indication of how much we spend locally and how much we spend with SMEs. Obviously, it changes every week, every month, every day, probably. And if you've got a particularly large capital contract, which with as a supplier out of the area, it kind of skews all the numbers and everything. But it's just trying to give you a flavour. But we can absolutely refine the numbers to make them more, the categories to make them more relevant, so we can look at York specific postcodes. We've done that before, haven't we? So we can do it, absolutely.
And just to add to what Debbie said there, in terms of a large contract, naturally would go to a larger business, whether they are in York or outside of York. What this data won't capture, because we won't have access to that data, is any subcontracting work that has gone to a local business. So the Guildhall, as an example, any subcontracting requirements, it was a requirement in that tender that they had to use local employment for those trades that they needed. We wouldn't be able to capture the spend or the money that they received through that contract. That would sit with the main contractor and their finance team.
Thank you for that. Councillor Taylor.
Thanks, Chair. So my understanding of this so far is that effectively more is going to be required of the local authority. And that might be for better or for worse, generally speaking. It remains to be seen. And I'm just wondering about capacity. So what's the FTE equivalent? The E stands for equivalent of the procurement team at the moment, and are you in a position to say what staff resource you think the council will need to do what's being asked of us justice when it all gets up and running? How far off from that are we?
Well, we are currently recruiting for 2 procurement managers. One, because the post will soon become vacant and the post is being recreated. That will certainly help the capacity within the team. It is quite difficult to say until we are fully in the process, as we are going on the journey now. It's in a manageable position. Once it's in force and we are working against the new legislation, there may be requirements for additional capacity within the procurement team, but at this moment in time, it's quite difficult to say. But it's not just the commercial procurement team; it's it's the service areas across the council and the contract managing team, because it is going to put quite a lot of burden on them to manage their contracts and the requirements that are needed from them. What they have to do, there will have to be reviews put in place as we go through the act.
Thank you. Just to follow up on that, because I know we've discussed it when we previously talked about procurement, the role of the managers in the service areas in terms of not just complying with requirements, but kind of driving procurements that achieve other objectives as well. Is that presumably that there's continues to be ongoing training for and support for those staff in service areas? Is this another sort of round of training and support they'll need to be up to speed on these new requirements?
Yes, yeah, exactly that. So we do have continuous procurement training anyway, but we are starting to change that procurement training to reflect the new requirements and to inform them what's going to be required of them. They will start happening from the end of April, and they will continue for a number of months. But we are going to lead in together and presenting there and informing directors and corporate directors of, you know, what they can expect to change and how that's going to impact them directly.
Okay, thank you. Supplement, sorry, councillor, from you. Please go ahead.
How big's the team currently?
Sorry, can you say that again?
How big is the team currently?
Okay,
So put me on the spot there. So at the minute, I've got 2 procurement managers, 2 seniors, 3 officers and 1 apprentice. Whilst I'm out to recruit for 2 managers, that's only going to increase the team by 1 because I'm losing 1. So I've got 11, including my compliance officer.
thank you. Councillor Eyre.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, so there's numerous references in benefits in terms of improved transparency, etc. I just because I'm really interested in reading contract procedure rules. In our contract procedure rules, there's from 26.2 onwards, there's a really long and detailed list about how and when officers can waive and not follow procurement rules. 26.1 just seems to give executive a blanket exemption to ignore procurement rules. What is the process in terms of doing that now, and is that the same, or will it change in terms of the new legislation?
So that won't directly change. That's in there as a last minute emergency provision. If there was a reason why the procurement legislation or the CPRs needed to be waived, that would be a member decision taken to executive. The proposal at the moment is for that to remain as is, because that doesn't directly link in with the PCRs or with the new Procurement Act coming up. So there's no proposed changes for that at the moment.
So what are the grounds then for that? On what grounds can executive just ignore?
The grounds is it's all the CPR clauses, so it has to rely on
Sorry,
one of
can
the
you
CPR.
explain what you mean by CPR?
Sorry, contract procedure rules.
Okay,
Yeah, so it has to align to a contract procedure rule for them to waive. They can't go outside of the contract procedure rules.
And does it have to be published somewhere?
The waivers are published every 4 months on the CYC website.
It's just worth pointing out the difference between the contract procedure rules and the legislation. So when we're talking about a waiver, we're talking about waiving our own internal contract procedure rules. So for example, we might say, and Chloe will correct me on the value, if it's up to 10k, we might say it's value for money. Between 10 and 50, we might say you need 3 quotes. We can waive the requirement to get 3 quotes if there are grounds to do that, but they're the sort of rules. So the rule might say between 10 and 50k, you need to get 3 quotes. That's the sort of thing we can waive. We're not, you know, the contract procedure rules, you can't waive legislation. We can't say we're not going to follow the legislation. So the contract procedure rules are the internal, and this is the kind of the government legislation, if you like.
so will the new legislative requirements have any, will they cause us to review and amend our internal rules?
They will, yeah, there will be continuous reviews of the contract procedure rules as we go through, but we've changed them to adapt to what we know now. But, you know, once it's enforced in October, that will require another review, which will take place between procurement and legal services.
But there'll still be the option for for a waiver,
Yes,
and that the reasons for those will be published, but that after the event, you're saying every 4 months?
yes, yes. So if a waiver request is submitted, it goes through relevant departments and has to get my sign off and DMO sign off. Then every 4 months.
DMO, sorry, I'm getting into jargon.
Sorry, Deputy Monitoring Officer, which is then published every 4 months into the public domain. The CPRs, the contract procedure rules, are also in the public domain as well. So it's transparent in terms of we are publishing what has been waived or what hasn't been through a procurement process. But those exemptions within the contract procedure rules will remain in place.
Thank you very much. Councillor Widdowson.
So with the new legislation, is there a best practice? Should you always be going out to tender? Should you always be doing this, that, and the other, or is it that in our set of rules? Just asking the question because from all the businesses I've ever worked in, you ask for a minimum of 3 and preferably as many possible tenders as you can get so that you can get the best value in whichever way you wish to measure that value.
Well, we should always be going out to tender and you know, testing the market and getting competition. So within our contract procedure rules, £5,000 and under, that is for the officer to determine best value, and they don't require procurement involvement. £5,000 to £25,000, they themselves can go out and seek 3 quotes, and they have to give us the evidence that they've had those 3 quotes. £25,000 plus, it's a formal procurement exercise, and it will be put through our your tender system. So there's only £5,000 under where there's no warrant for a procurement to take place. £5,000 plus, you must seek quotes for your piece of work or your requirements. And that is very much still driven through the procurement legislation.
Okay.
Unless we agree waiver to waive competition.
Thank you. Councillor Merritt, on to you next.
Yes, the paper 23 talks about possible IT systems, I think, to assist in monitoring. I assume are your existing systems up to the new legislation, or are they having to be modified or getting a new system?
So we only have one procurement system, and that is our tendering portal called Your Tender. That is still very much up and running, and Cabinet Office are working with the creators of those tendering portals to make sure that they are equipped to deal with the new legislation as they should. In terms of within the paper, when it's referencing a contract management system or a social value monitoring system, we don't have them at the moment at the authority. That is something that should be considered to allow us to help achieve what we want to achieve as a contracting authority, and allow us to monitor exactly what social value requirements we are asking for and what's actually being delivered. At the minute, it is a manual task that the commercial procurement team, legal services and contracts managers across the authority, it's a manual task for them to go away and try and work out what's actually being delivered from the contract. So should a system ever be put in place, it will be in accordance with legislation. So.
Can I also ask, in terms of what you're doing on current contracts for social value, has that been updated to reflect the new council plan in terms of priorities and so on?
So any new contracts moving forward or any new procurements moving forward will absolutely capture the commitments that we've got in our council plan.
Supplementary, Councillor Healy.
Thank you, Chair. Again, paragraph 23, what's a social value credit?
So social value credits are essentially, it's a money pot that you continue to build up, and then you are able to give that money to a charity or distribute that into the community. They are commonly known to build when you're using a framework. So we might use a framework that externally has been set up. And if we put so much money through that framework, they will then take a percentage of what we've put into a social value credit pot and then give that to COIC to distribute out to a charity or however we see fit as a social value engagement. That's how we would deal with that.
Yeah.
How much back did we get last year?
I would have to take away and have a look.
If you could, or go back a couple of years, but yeah, I think, would anyone else be interested?
I'm still getting over the fact that we've got all.
Sorry, your microphone's on. So do you want, is it a supplementary?
It's just got, I'm still trying to get over the fact that we've got all these rules and regulations, but they can just be waived.
Councillor Stewart.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, in sort of very simple terms, some people could see that procurement is there to buy the goods, and other people could say it's there to set the processes and the envelope for how other people buy the goods. And it's my sort of thought that the council is on an upward curve in terms of how much of the sort of buying of the goods we want to go through the procurement sort of department. Is that the case? I mean, is that, if I get a nod on or shake of the head on that?
Or an answer.
So could you just repeat the?
Well, so it's the extent to which everything goes through procurement in terms of procurement will sort of buy the stuff. versus procurement is setting the rules and the processes, and then officers are buying the stuff.
Oh, apologies, yeah, no, they come through the commercial procurement team. So if you, anything that you want to buy that's £5,000 plus, my team and the legal services team will be involved in that.
Okay, so now everything would come through?
Yes.
Okay, in which case I don't need my main question, so that's good.
Fine. Councillor Waller.
Thank you, Chair. Will this assist with the rollout of 100% purchase order systems?
That's an excellent question, Councillor Waller. What would assist with that would be if we did have a contract management system, which we don't have at the moment. So as Chloe said, it's a manual system when we are managing contracts. So if we were able to identify a suitable contract management system, I think that would help us track purchase orders against a contract, which is something that we don't have the ability to do unless it's a manual exercise. So I think it's certainly something that would improve the situation if we had a contract management system that would link through to the finance system, really.
Thank you. Councillor Steels-Walshaw.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, it was just a question around the KPIs around the spending contracts over 5 million. I know those KPIs aren't published yet, but did you have kind of any idea what they might be looking at?
It's for the council to determine what those KPIs are. So Cabinet Office have released example KPIs that we can adopt into our contracts should we need to. But it's for the council to determine what those KPIs are and how we monitor and manage them.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Merritt.
Yeah, can I just come back to the contract management systems of it? It's a sort of little vague, you know, you've indicated that you can see potential benefits from it. Are we specifically looking at that? Because obviously it may have benefits in terms of how much additional staff you actually require if it's a reasonably all singing, all dancing type of situation, plus obviously hopefully efficiencies from tightening up on the purchase orders and other things. Is there a proper process going on in terms of looking at that and coming to a conclusion about whether there would be benefits and getting on with purchasing if that is the case?
At the moment, for contract management and monitoring, no, there's no current live exercise going on to find the best system or the best route for that. That is because we have multiple different styles and suites of contracts that we use at the authority. So it's understanding what the demand is at the authority, what's the most commonly used contract, what the gaps are that we need to fill. So that exercise hasn't yet been undertaken. We have been doing exercises to find a social value portal. So that's taken priority at the moment.
Thank you. Let's look around if any members have any other questions or comments they would like to make. No. Thank you very much. Councillor Burton.
What exactly is a social value policy?
So the social value policy doesn't yet sit with the commercial procurement team, but it sets out how we intend to drive social value through our contracts and through the authority, and it should explain what social value is when we say that. So that could be anything between creating apprenticeships during a contract, using local supply chains to look after York's local economy, community engagements, charity works, and engaging with universities and colleges to get young people in and to train them and give them the trades that they're working on. That is what the social value policy should state.
Would that cover sort of diversity and inclusion policies within firms as well? Or not?
I believe so.
It would, yeah.
Thank you. Councillor Merritt.
Is social value specifically sort of narrowly defined, or is social value widely defined in terms of, say, some of the environment issues and carbon issues that we were talking about earlier?
So social value, it covers quite a big range of things. The umbrella is quite big. So environmental impacts, environmental changes, social value in terms of apprenticeships, local economy work. It covers a whole range of things. Social value is referred to in the new Act as maximising public benefit. So anything that can maximise public benefit will be driven through that and would be classed as social values. That will include environmental elements as well.
So it doesn't constrain us in terms of.
No.
Yeah.
No constraints.
What's your anticipated process? So you're going to produce a social value policy document and that will go to the exec? Any timescale?
Yeah, well, I'm in the process of speaking with those who look after the current social value policy that we have at the authority, to bring that in-house to the commercial procurement team, so I can then update that, adapt that, and link that in with the procurement strategy as well.
Would it be possible for that to come back here when it's sort of near enough ready? It's a pre-scrutiny before it goes to the exec.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Stewart.
Thank you, Chair. I'll just go back to the everything goes through you except for the under £5,000 sort of bill. How much do you sort of look into the under £5,000? Because obviously it's quite a lot of money in certain areas. So if I just work in a humble little part of West Office, but I think I'll spend £5,000 on, really good screen, for example, and do something like that. And another part of West Office, I just think I'll just get some really nice chairs, and those could be massive savings which would add up. So do you sort of scrutinise certain ones at the under 5,000, or do you look for patterns, or how does that work?
Yeah, exactly that. We look for patterns. So every 3.5 weeks we have a PO report, and that captures all the spend that is being made at the authority for that month. And we don't get to £5,000 under and not look. That is still very much captured, and the procurement team will go away and investigate that. Patterns are very, very important, because if you are spending £3,000 with a supplier 1 week, and then week 3 you're spending £20,000, obviously you go over that threshold. So we have to be very, very careful that people are not splitting up POs or splitting up invoices. So that is scrutinised in depth every 3.5 weeks when those reports are received. But every day those questions are being asked, and we are asking about people spending money. Our compliance officer within the procurement team, that's her role, to ensure that money is being spent as it should be, and that it's under the correct processes.
Thank you very much. Thank you, officers. Thank you, Councillor Lomas, for coming along and answering our questions, listening to our comments. In terms of recommendations rising, thank you for offering to bring the social value policy back here for us to have a look at. Obviously, we've got an end of October implementation date. Maybe that will slip again. Who knows? Or a betting man, I think it probably might. So I'll kind of leave it in your hands as to when would be an opportune time to come back to this committee and say the new policy has gone live. Here are some emerging, themes from that. Rather than say we want you to come back on this date, tell us what's happened. I think we can see how things proceed and act accordingly. Councillor Merritt?
Yes. I think that would be very helpful, and happy to support that. When you do come back, I think it might be useful to give us an update on what you're doing on contract management side as well, if that's all right. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, we'll go away. We'll get sort of a bit of a plan together, and we can at least give you an indication of when it's likely in terms of just your work planning, but then acknowledge that it might need to slip a little bit depending on what the government decides to do on any given day of the week. So we'll be able to give you, I think, a rough indication, and then maybe have to slip it a meeting or two if other issues come in, if that's okay.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Okay, so any other comments from any of the members before we move on? No?
Just, social credits, they were gonna come back to us with what they.
Oh, yeah,
had
sorry,
social
yeah,
credit.
yeah.
And
Social
where did
credits.
the money go? Yeah.
Thank you very much. So we move on to agenda item 6, work plan. So we have one more meeting of this committee in this municipal year where we'll be looking at the 10-year strategies. So having done some scrutiny on the strategies before they were approved, we're now going to scrutinise them a year on from, maybe more than a year on from there. Adoption, I'll set a meeting myself and the vice chair with Claire Fole to talk about how we want to, what we want to get out of that session rather than going back over the documents that we've been over before. We've got, in the minutes of the last meeting, we were due to have an update from Helen Whiting on workforce development in May. That will now come in June. And separately, Sam Blythe, who's leading with Claire Fole on work on combined authority related matters, would like to bring have two slots on one on the June agenda, one on the July agenda, to talk about combined authority pipeline projects. So Sam and Claire, I think, will go around each of the scrutiny committees to talk about, to gather ideas and suggestions to inform the council's pipeline of shovel-ready projects for whenever the mayor is elected. So these can be presented to the mayor and pitched to the mayor and say, here we are. Now, we shan't mention any specific potential projects in York or elsewhere. So basically, scrutiny can help inform that work to ensure that as a city we speak as one to the new mayor and are able to put forward our asks for investment, some of which we've spoken about tonight. And they may well come up in the course of those conversations at scrutiny. So Sam will come and talk to us on the 10th of June and the 8th of July, so that we can have input into that. I'd also like to use the May meeting to gather ideas and suggestions for potentials, future scrutiny topics. Other committees are doing similarly. And we need to do the same. Obviously, some of the things that we do, we as other committees do, receive as a matter of course. But where there are specific items that members would like, that within the remit of this committee would like us to spend some time on in the next municipal year, we can have that discussion at May's meeting. But I'll send a note around beforehand just to prompt members to have a think. Okay, assuming there are no further comments on work plan, there's no urgent business. So declare the meeting closed. So those of you who are going home to watch Middlesbrough versus Leeds United can get home